Okay. I'll call to order the school board meeting for the Greater Albany Public School District at 7 p.m., July 12th. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you very much. And if my fellow directors don't mind, if we can move E1 to right underneath C, please. If anybody doesn't have any objections.
So that is the approval of the agenda, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So there's a lot here, and I know we're scheduled from 7 to 9, and I don't know how to prioritize the time other than I think there's at least one essential that I don't know where it would fit on the agenda, but I'd like to talk about how we operate as a board, whether or not we're going to use Robert's Rules of Order, just the mechanics of how we meet as a board. And so if we could add that, or if it fits somewhere, it maybe fits its governance, but it's not the calendar, so maybe you make a 3A, and that would be just how we conduct our meeting and how we operate. I have concerns about agenda item D and how it's transpired over the time of COVID. I know the public has wanted to engage, and it's hard to engage in a public meeting when you're doing it by Zoom or people aren't there. But it seems to me that the couple of times that I've listened, participated in that, were at a place that a lot of that is people making a statement or talking at each other instead of to each other. And I don't know of a good way, faced with all the questions and engagement that folks want, to do that in the context of a normal board meeting. And so what I would propose tonight is that we drop D from the agenda, but we also discuss how we're engaging the public, and maybe we do a weekly meeting, a listening session. I don't know that it needs to be a public meeting, and I don't know that I have the answers for that tonight, but it feels to me like that's something we really need to do as a community. So with that, I would propose that we eliminate agenda item D from the agenda tonight and add a 3A, which is discussing the procedures of how we operate. And when we do that, we'll get into that so the public knows and understands, and it gives all parties a chance to discuss whatever is before us at that time equally, both the folks that happen to be in the majority on an issue and the folks in the minority as well. So that is a long-winded motion, and I'll restate it. I would move approval of the agenda as presented, with the exception of striking agenda item D and adding an E3A, which is the conducting of board business in public meetings.
So there's just been a motion made to remove item number D and add in E.3.A to discuss the mechanics and Robert's rules during board meetings.
Can I speak on this issue? It's now open to speak against?
Director Thompson.
So E3A is fine. I think that's one of the first things we should do. Talk about how we do our business. That's fine for addition. But D, comments from the public, and we wrangled with just that. That was one of the many suggestions we wrangled with in the previous board. It is difficult, but we came up with this concept, and it is a chance for people to have their comments as close as possible as it would have been, have them been able to come into the meeting and speak to us. And it takes up time, I agree, but that's what we're here for, and that's what we need to listen. So if we want to change that in the future, I would be more amenable to it, but we signed up for it, and you three that just were elected ran on transparency and openness, and to now say these comments that were given in good faith are just wiped away from the agenda tonight, no, I'm against that.
Thank you for your comments, Director Thompson.
I think they would be entered to the record, and in Chair Butzner's words, as I watched you guys struggle with it in your last meeting, this is the board's agenda and the board's meeting.
Understood. Absolutely, understood, completely. I'm just saying that the community made a huge deal about not being heard, and this is it's not a perfect system. It's kind of, it's not smooth, but it's the best we could come up with, and it's the closest, I think, to actually being here and speaking. And so perhaps going forward, but tonight, it is what it is, and I think we should honor that. We should honor the however many, I don't know how many messages we got, but we should listen to them.
Mr. Chairman, I call the
Aganaga.
question.
Yes, sir. Actually, Director Wilson, do you have a comment?
I see both sides of this, and I'm having a little internal struggle. I do want it to be part of the record, and it needs to be that, and I had not taken the time to read them, just with my work schedule, so I'm remiss in that, but I also look at the clock and look at the time and trying to get through a whole bunch of stuff. So I see both sides on this. I know that's very non-definitive, but I do think that people need to be heard.
Chair Aganaga, may I
Vice-
have a moment?
Let me check with the vice chair, and he'll grant you your moment, ma'am.
Thank you.
I think we need to hear them, but I personally want us to be able to have people come back in and share publicly with us in person. So if that's the idea where we're going, is we're inviting the public back in to speak, I love it. Okay, let's do it. These people would be the first up in the order to get to talk. That's my take. I mean, we need to be transparent as much as we can, and the public getting to speak is important.
Madam Superintendent.
I agree with Vice Chair Morse that it's important for us to be able to have the public be able to come back in person. One of the things we have also noticed, however, that is an advantage of our being able to broadcast is also the fact that people are now writing in who aren't able to get to a 7 o'clock meeting. Perhaps they're working, perhaps they have obligations with their children, perhaps they're trying to feed their family. However, they are able to have their voice heard through public comment. I think it would be, I would agree with Director Thompson that it would be contrary to the expressed interests of our 3 new board members for us to change what has been publicly posted and communicated regarding how people can get their voice heard at this meeting. I think that it also, if we move to a point where voices will only be heard in person, then this board is choosing not to hear from a segment of this community. Thank you.
Madam,
So to be clear here, we're so far from where we need to be in engaging the public and hearing from them that this opportunity we can go with. But from my perspective, we got a lot of work to do. And I hear a lot of, like I said, people talking at each other, not to each other and not engaging with each other. And it's under the format of just sending in a letter. Some of them raise great points. I hadn't thought of them before, and others are making a public statement, if you will. And they can do that with our meeting, at our meeting. They have other ways they can do that as well. So
Director Nyquist.
I guess my question is it the will of the majority of the board that I amend the motion?
And I want to respect your call to question. My comment on the matter is on the entranceway of the United States Air Force Space Command, the most prominent scientific development people in the world. It says on the front of the building, the most dangerous term in any language is we've always done it this way. And so I've always respected that. I'll call for a vote. Director Wilson.
Can you repeat the question, please?
The motion on the table was to add E.3.A, mechanics of the board meeting, Robert's rules, and to remove item D. And
Accept it as presented.
And to clarify, item D would still go on the record in the packet for tonight, but it won't be read out loud.
Chair Okanawa, could I add one other data point for the board to consider? One of the things that will come up later in the meeting tonight is that I'm going to ask the board to consider a special session because we have a couple of items that were not ready in time for the agenda to go out that just came together at the last minute that really can't afford to wait until the August meeting. So we could potentially consider adding a special session and trying to cull this agenda a little bit to balance the load, if the plan would be to consider these comments and then move to a different format.
So I'm good with all that. If tonight at 9 o'clock that we don't get done with this important business we have to do, that we just recess until tomorrow at 5:30 or 7 o'clock or whatever time it is. Because it's the middle of July, school starts in September, and
Chair Aganaga, are we changing the time frame of our board meetings so there's now a limit of 2 hours? Is that correct?
The goal of the district, as I believe on the calendar, is 7 to 9.
that's also published in the agenda, right?
It-
So,
It would be a change, it would be like, as you said, a change in practice. And so if this board only wants to work for 2 hours each time we're in session, we certainly must add more sessions to the agenda, to the calendar.
We're going to take a vote on the motion that is standing right now. Mr. Wilson, Director Wilson,
I'm going to vote nay.
Director Nyquist,
aye.
Director Thompson,
No.
Director Morris,
So we're looking to move this to a meeting tomorrow.
no, sir.
No, that wasn't the motion. The motion was to remove D and add a
Okay.
E3A.
So my only concern is, under the old rules, we said we'd read these. So if we're going to read these at another time, I'm good with that. If we're saying we're not reading them, then I think we need to read them. So I'd say nay.
This is really not worth fighting over.
Right, I get it.
If you all want to read them, and at whatever time we end tonight, if I don't have done what I think I need to get done as a board member, I'm going to ask that we continue this meeting tomorrow night at 7 o'clock.
Okay, so is everyone okay with, right now, put tabling section D until we get to the end of our meeting? Is there a consensus to that?
I think you need to finish the vote.
And I'll abstain.
So I think, just handicapping this, I think the motion failed.
Yeah.
And so I would offer a new motion that we add 3A, which is to talk about operational procedures of our meetings. And the rest of the agenda stay as it is.
Take a vote on that? I second that.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Nyquist,
Aye.
Director Thompson.
Aye.
And Director Morris,
Yes, aye.
and I will say aye as well. So, I would not like to read the comments, because of my personal preference. So I would take volunteers from the board to read comments.
I'll read the first one.
Okay.
From Heather Medina Sacita and Juan Sacita. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Gap School Board, we are the parents of 2 Latinx children that attend Gap schools, Liberty Elementary and Memorial Middle School. We are also members of the Hispanic Advisory Committee and the Albany Student Advocacy Project. We have been in various events where Superintendent Goff has participated at the Hispanic Advisory Committee meetings and Latinx community meetings. She has wanted to listen to the concerns of all the various community members, especially those that have not been traditionally heard or given time. Superintendent Goff is someone who cares and is actively building bridges with the whole community and not just those that are traditionally in the dominant culture. We appreciate all the efforts the past school board members took to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want the incoming school board to recognize that they need to support all of Albany. We need board members to bring Albany together when it comes to what's best for our schools and racial equity. We want everyone's voices to count, not just a small set of constituents who have the ear of some board members. We are encouraged that many teachers are in support of teaching our children that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, and that many times that means teaching some of the histories that are often not shared historically. All Oregonians need to know inclusive history that is culturally responsive, which is necessary so we can continue to better our society. The census data from 2019 shows a diversity Albany. The Black, Indigenous people of color in 2019 represented 20.82%. The changes in diversity continue. For these continued census changes in diversity reflect a reason why diversity, equity, and inclusion are important. It helps us all be better citizens and neighbors for each other. Thank you for your work and attention to these matters. Heather, Medina, and Juan.
We have a volunteer for public comment number 2.
Do we have some that's printed out? Because I'm having a tough time reading the screen. I'm happy to read, but I just can't read
Sure.
the font.
Here, I'll pass that one over there. You can do the next one. I'll do number 2. So this is from Nelson Osario to school board member. I would like this letter to be read at the school board meeting on July 12, 2021. First, I would like to thank you all for your hard work and dedication to our children in the greater Albany Public Schools. I would also like to congratulate our new elected school board members. I hope you stand fast and hold people accountable for the continued improvement of our schools. In the hope of transparency and open dialogue, I would like the school board meetings to be open to the public starting on July 12, 2021. I, as a parent and taxpayer, I would like to know what decisions are being made at the school board meetings that are going to influence our next generations and leaders. On May 5th, Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State signed Senate Bill 5044 into law that requires critical race theory, CRT, training for all staff, board members, teachers, and administrators in public school in the state. As a result of this news, I would like to know, for the record, how each and every school board member and superintendent stand on the issue of teaching CRT in our schools here in Albany. I would also like to know how much, if any, taxpayer money has been used to train our teachers and supportive staff in CRT training. Our goal in the classroom should be to make sure our students can thrive and succeed in their studies and prepare them for higher education. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in person on July 12, 2021. Nelson Osario.
Public comment number 3, submitted by Stacy Lee. Dear School Board, in 2002, I moved to Albany to take a teaching job with our school district, and I have been connected to the district and our community ever since. I have closely observed the work of 5 superintendents of Greater Albany Public Schools. While Melissa Goff is hardly the first to care about student outcomes and our community, she is the most inspiring in both of these facets. Working in education has been an unprecedented challenge over the last 16 months in Oregon, our nation, and across the globe. In the past, our district has relied on traditions and personalities in times of stress, often with very different results for students depending upon which school a student attends and which parent voices are loudest. This was not necessarily the intention, but is often what took place. As our district student population has grown and we've employed more early career teachers than ever before, there has also been an increasing need for cohesive district vision in order to provide a guaranteed and viable education for each student. At the beginning of her leadership, Superintendent Goff prioritized community input in strategic planning, making a deliberate effort to hear from a representative swath of our community and centering the needs of our students. This doesn't mean the loudest voices have not been heard, but it means that they have not been the only voices heard. It means our district is developing a new habit of consistently asking who is most impacted by a decision, how that decision impacts students with the highest need, and whose voices have not been heard yet. Difficult decisions have been based in thoughtful consideration of how they will move our students and our system forward. Superintendent Goff has been an exemplary leader, and she has continued to hold forums and graciously listen to challenging feedback without losing sight of her commitment to our district strategic plan and improving outcomes for all students. There is a shortage of people willing to serve as a school district superintendent in our state and nationally. We have leaned on Superintendent Goff's unique blend of leadership experience in multiple school districts and deep ties to this community. We are making progress in developing stronger district systems that serve all students. I have a great love of our district, and I have never been so confident that our superintendent understands the need to truly serve all students, including those we have not served well in the past. I encourage you to take the time to listen to a broad cross-section of parents, teachers, and students from across our district and see the progress we are making under Superintendent Goff's leadership. Public comment number 4, submitted by Jeff Lowry. Dear esteemed school board members, transparency and governance is more important today than ever before. In a time in which far too many decisions are being made behind closed doors, the general public struggles as never before to maintain confidence in elected leaders. Historically, the town hall or public meeting has provided the public the greatest means to air grievances and to encourage better governance. Public in-person meetings allow people to interact and share opinions and views in a way that cannot be captured by electronic means, including remote Zoom conferencing and social media. When people meet in person, they share views in a way that never happens elsewhere. With COVID restrictions now easing, it should be much easier to conduct in-person meetings open to the general public. Now is the time to regain public confidence and provide transparency. Please consider restoring public in-person meetings.
Okay, number 5, from Maria Buttram. Dear board members, your decision to elect a chair who created a hostile work environment through disrespectful behavior and spreading misinformation about Superintendent Goff and Assistant Superintendent Harlan to residents and other board members is disappointing. It indicates a wanton disregard for the founded harassment complaints filed against him for which he was censured by the last board and establishes a troubling aura of misogamy. Commending him for carrying himself with poise during difficulties, direct quote from Director Wilson, which he created through his misbehavior, is insulting, disrespectful, and sexist. As you consider the way forward for school year 2022, I ask that you frame your decisions on the equity portion of the Ready Schools Safe Learners Resiliency Framework for the 2021 school year. Ensure safety and wellness, prioritizing basic needs such as food, shelter, wellness, supportive relationships, and support for mental, social, and emotional health of students and staff. I hope you will continue building on the work by the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and previous board in this area as recognized by the Oregon Health Authority in May as appropriate application of best practices and CDC guidance as related to cohorts, quarantine, contact tracing, masking for the unvaccinated, and social distancing. Center health and well-being, acknowledging the health and mental health impacts of this past year. Commit to creating learning opportunities that foster creative expression, make space for reflection and connection, and center on the needs of the whole child rather than solely emphasizing academic achievement. This may prove especially hard for each of you if you continue to double down on your pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. If you believe you have succeeded or elevated yourself without any outside help, what is your goal for serving on the school board? We all need help, some more than others. Equality is a lofty goal, but the path to equality is equity. Again, I beseech you, if you haven't familiarized yourself with the work of Glenn Singleton and Courageous Conversations, that you do so. Don't wait another day. Learn to look at problems through the eyes of those unlike you so that you can effectively serve all GAP students. Number 3, cultivate connection and relationship. Reconnecting with one another after a year of separation can occur through quality learning experiences and deep interpersonal relationships among family, students, and staff. Last school year did not bring the best out of everyone, and even for those for whom it did, their stories of resilience are greatly diminished at this point. You have the opportunity to build bridges with the current superintendent and GAP staff if you are willing to depoliticize your positions, set aside your, and that's time. Okay, next one, number 6, from Jody Yoder to the incoming board. After running on a platform of transparency, open schools, and community engagement, I was disappointed to see what appears to be a lack of willingness to follow through with those promises so early in the process. As a community member and very involved parent, it appears that the board has gotten less transparent in a very short amount of time, and am concerned about that change. Also, with the easing of COVID mandates and the push to open the schools, I was surprised to see that this meeting would not be open to the public. I feel an explanation to the community is needed. Lastly, in regards to community engagement, this is one of the most important aspects of successful leadership. I hope to see you all reach out to all communities before any major decisions are made, especially if those decisions were not part of your campaign process. I have worked with the previous board enough to know how much time and energy is put into successful district leadership, and I understand there is a learning curve as so many of you are new members. I am looking forward to seeing the opportunities you give as you reach out to the various communities that make up our vibrant, diverse district. Number 7, Andrea Bartel. To Directors Morris, Wilson, and Nyquist, their irresponsible and divisive move to nominate Director Aguanaga as the board chair was unacceptable. You ignored the warned concern from Director Thompson, then offered praise to Aguanaga when you know he has legally been found guilty by the past board, reaffirming to him that his actions are above consequence and send the message to their staff that their voices and their trauma is not valued and dismissed. Director Aguanaga, you completely showed your inability to take responsibility for your actions and cause further harm to the staff by seeking to gain power over them. You were showing your true self by accepting this chair position, valuing power over healing. Outside of Director Thompson, each of you are teaching the community that you cannot be trusted. You have disregarded the victimization of the staff. You have affirmed it, that you will abuse your power by elevating those who are in agreement with you and disempower those who are different than you. You have shown you only have loyalty to your agenda, not to the equity, diversity, and inclusion of all people. You are misusing your power and shamefully disqualifying the other voice, which is anti-democratic and extremely hurtful for the health of our community. You must do better. Please stop seeking to dismantle the amazing progress that has occurred the last 2 years and seek to truly work together to create an educational pathway that gives every kid what they need to develop their full academic and social potential. From Andrea. Number 8, Michael Priest. Please vote to allow in-person school board meeting. The time is now, no delays. What is happening around our country, state, and local schools? We now will confront those that feel the need to divide us. CRT is the tool these radicals are using to divide us by race and politics. Our children will suffer. There needs to be some frank conversation and the need for information so the board knows what our community demands from our schools. Thank you, and I can't wait to see you in person. From Michael. Number 9, Nancy Greenman. Good evening, board members. Welcome, new board members. Having spent years working in district administration and without a background in K-12 education, I know very well the steep learning curve and time involved in understanding the workings of a public school district, funding streams, pedagogy. Thank you. Special programs and board policy are only some of the areas unique to public K-12 schools. In my experience, understanding each and how each intersects and influences the others take considerable time and patience. I applaud you for taking on this demanding task. I know that you come to this board with some specific ideas and priorities. I also know from personal experience that the view from the inside is very different from that of even the most passionately focused district parent or community member. I hope that you will give yourself time to settle in and to get to know your whole GAPS community within the context of your new roles before making any dramatic steps. I hope you will avail yourself of the excellent training and support provided by OSBA and the broad engagement and excellent work done on the district strategic plan. Our children are our future and precious to all of us. Thank you for giving the time, the care, and the thoughtfulness they deserve. From Nancy. Number 10, Iris Carrasco. Board members, I bought a house here in Albany in 2009 and have been working in this community since. My family and I have established roots in a place where I have known I was in the minority. From experience, I believed hard work and community building would allow me to feel welcomed or at least use my skill set to be needed. After many years, I've been taken a beating, experienced both overt and covert racism. But I have continued enduring and rising above it because I hope better things are coming. I took a job at GAPS in 2018 as a second grade teacher and still continued feeling the same way. That's not time for this one. The same way about Albany and our school district. However, when Melissa Goff came to to our teacher rally after she was hired, I heard for the first time a person who was culturally competent, a visionary for creating tomorrow's competitive workforce, and a woman who is not afraid of the hard work it will take on her personal toll to mold this district to welcome all its community members, staff, families, and students. Melissa Goff has started the transformative work that it takes to make our school district inclusive. As a result of being a person of color, I regularly hear about the racist issues that happen within our schools. Since Goff has been at GAPS, she has handled them swiftly and as an informed, culturally competent person. The community appreciates this. When she prevented the Albany police from welcoming Day at the return for school, I was thankful for both the families I work with and the staff who do not have a trusting view of the police. The community is thankful for this. When staff were offered the option to take part in courageous conversations training, I heard my peers at GAPS start having tough conversations about race because our staff had adopted the vocabulary and context to explore ways to be informed allies to people of color. I personally appreciate this. For the first time, I have experienced change in my school. I see it in my peers, and I can see a brighter future for my son to attend school in Albany as a Latino. Melissa Goff is not your typical status quo superintendent. She does the hard work and offers a unique skill set of being a white female in a position of power, who is removing barriers to make our school district more welcoming to all its families. This may be scary for some who don't understand that our differences make us stronger, more resilient, and competitive in tomorrow's job market. If you would like additional information about my letter, you can contact me, phone number given. Iris. Number 11, from Tom Cordier, please return to open public school boarding meetings to those who are fully vaccinated immediately. The public has been limited in their ability to fully participate in giving feedback to the board. Enough with the mask and lockouts. Tom. Public 12, Jenny Brosh. I'm writing to give my full support of equity, diversity, and inclusion work that GAPS is teaching and modeling. I hope you'll consider my voice and support of Superintendent Melissa Goff and her staff and the work they are doing. My daughter is a teacher for the district and is on the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. She is committed to this work and wants to see it continue for the benefit of Albany students and her own children. I'm a lifetime resident of Albany, attending our schools from 1968 to 1980, and so have all three of my children. My K-12 education didn't include multicultural history from a diverse perspective. In the 70s, history throughout the U.S. was taught from a single perspective, that of the people on the inside of America, or white men and women. The true stories of those on the margins or pushed to the margins was not sought or were covered up. In grade school, I learned that there were slaves in early America, but I didn't know what that meant. I learned much more about slavery by watching the 1977 miniseries Roots, based on the book by Alex Haley. It gave me a view into what must have been like to live in slavery. I felt so many emotions on watching the show, and I am thankful my parents felt it was important for me and my siblings to watch. We had many discussions on it following that show that allowed me to talk through those emotions and develop critical thinking skills to decide how to use that information. After graduation, I attended college and took a class on multicultural history in the U.S. I was shocked at what I learned and embarrassed at how much I didn't know about U.S. history. It felt like a big cover-up had happened. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is about creating awareness. Everybody benefits from EDI work that GAPS is doing by giving a voice to those on the margins or pushed to the margins. An inclusive community is a stronger, healthier community that works together for the good of all. The work that the GAPS School Board and Melissa Goff and staff have done and are doing to foster EDI is impressive. I applaud and fully support their efforts. In conclusion, it is important for us to learn from each other and from all aspects of our past, starting at a young age with age-appropriate content and open discussions. Children can grow to learn about collective mistakes so they are not repeated. At the same time, they need to learn about our successes so they can be modeled and expanded. The Reconstruction Era of the South after the Civil War was a success in many ways. African Americans were free to develop, create, and nurture their communities. African Americans created public schools for both black and white children during that period, and this became a model for our current public school system in the U.S. It was an example of equitable, diverse, and inclusive work for the good of all children and their communities. Thank you for listening to my comments. I have chosen to live in this community and raise my children here because I love this place. I want all people in our community to be and feel safe and welcome here. Please consider my letter in your decisions for the good of all in our greater Albany public community. From Jenny. Number 13, From Joseph Meekins, dear school board members, I'm an employee of this district, and I've taught at a middle school for 8 years now. I grew up in Albany, attending middle school and high school here. I am proud of our town and community and would like to see that the young students in our district have every opportunity to grow and thrive. I am hopeful that this school board will promote policy that push academic excellence and accountability in our schools, rebuild and foster current positive partnerships in our community, and give our educators the tools they need to effectively do their jobs. Thank you for the time and effort you will dedicate to our school district. This fall, feel free to visit me in my classroom to get a firsthand look at what we do on a daily basis. I will do my best to provide you with any information and feedback that will assist you in your mission. I look forward to working with you in the coming years. Respectfully, Joseph. Number 14 and last one, from Jason Dorsett, Greater Albany Public Schools Advisory Board members. The Corvallis Albany branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Persons, NAACP, welcomes the board's new members and offers its partnership in all matters related to and associated with diversity, equity, inclusion, and social change. To that end, we would like specifically to affirm our appreciation toward the following board goals approved in December 2020 and listed in today's packet. 2, continue to learn about, implement, and support diversity, equity, and inclusion in all board work and board actions by using an equity lens with the commitment to supporting and creating an environment and opportunities where belonging is the default. Continue to learn about and support the implementation of mental health services for students and staff. Continue to enhance and expand relationship with communities, families, and staff. Wherever we can help you succeed with these goals, we are ready and willing. In addition to support, we stand ready to opine and interrupt any and all actions that work against our goals. Our mission is similar. The mission of the Albany-Corvallis area branch of the NAACP in Oregon is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights of all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination. To that end, we seek continued positive engagement with all the members of the board and the constituents and stakeholders within, as we have done in the past. Jason J. Dorsett, President, NAACP, Corvallis Albany Branch. That's all of them.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate it. We're going to move on to E2, pre-planning meeting schedule. If you want to join me on board book or in paper. I did have some ideas about pre-planning, and I wanted to get your gentlemen's opinion. So as of right now, the board chair is at every one, and the board chair is at every other one. My proposal to the board would be the board chair and the board vice chair alternate. And then that would bring you gentlemen in more throughout the year. So you get more of an understanding. If there's issues that are important to you, you can bring to that pre-planning meeting. Because otherwise it breaks out to like you're there about 3 times a year. This would essentially double it. I was just seeing what you guys, if you had an opinion on it. Maybe Michael, because you've seen it before.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're offering more opportunities to have that say, though, like I said, I never felt like when I was on the out, not part of it, I always felt like I could, if I really had something, I would get my say. I never felt totally on the outside, but, the point of the chair is to work closely with the superintendent to produce the agenda, and I just, you're giving me a benefit, so I would take it, but I think you should think long and hard if giving up that very important part of being a chair.
Sure. And my plan, like I talked to Assistant Superintendent Harlan last meeting, was to make sure we're respectfully communicating and that we have eyes on of each other's plans and what's going on. So I would offer that to you gentlemen, if you want it. If
So
not, we
I
can.
have a question, and
Yes, sir.
it's different than the environment I usually operate in, so it's, what it is. So whose agenda is it? Is it the board's agenda? Is it the staff's agenda? As I understand it, the previous board passed a rule towards the end of that says that ultimately this is the superintendent's agenda, not the governing body's agenda. Just a point of clarification.
A couple of things I would say. One, I know as part of, oh, maybe not, I should check your board packet. The policies in AB that were changed were in accordance with OSBA. So while I appreciate the last board certainly did vote for them, it wasn't things that they made up or language that they made up. Pre-planning is typical of all school districts, and it happens at different, usually a week or more before the board meeting. The agenda for pre-planning is an opportunity for both staff and the board to bring together items that they may need or have questions about before the meeting. So in particular, when there are questions from the board that will require staff to either do some research or collect some information, it gives them the opportunity to do that, and it certainly gives other staff the opportunity to say, hey, we need these items on the board agenda for the coming week, either because there's a requirement, either because there's a curricular need, or in operations, it certainly happens more than in curriculum and instruction.
So if I'm to understand your answer, it is the superintendent's agenda by edict of the OSBA? Is that right?
Actually, what happens is that staff, the superintendent at the end of the staff lineup, create an agenda based on what board members ask for, both during board meetings and in between. And then the purpose of pre-planning is actually to have the chair, or in this case, following what Chair Aganaga's suggestion is, the vice chair approve the agenda. So it is the board's agenda. The purpose of the meetings is for staff and the board chair, or in this case, the vice chair, to be able to discuss those items. If the board chair says we want to move that to another week, or that isn't something we need to bring forward at this time, that is then what occurs.
So if I, as an example, want something on the agenda, and I ask the chair to have it placed on the agenda, and the chair asks that it be placed on the agenda,
It gets on the
It will
agenda.
be there.
Yeah,
Perfect, thank you.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
I think it's the nature of a part-time position versus a full-time, such as the county commissioner. I mean, that's, the idea that I know, I know big picture items, but the day-to-day machinery of the district is really, I mean, even more so on them than us.
Well, at the end of the day, the governing body is the governing body.
True,
and
true,
it's us.
and that's why we just confirmed that, yeah, that if you really want something, but I'm just trying to, the general, I think in the description of the superintendent's working relationship with the board, I think I'm basically restating that, and that our part-time nature, I'm trying to differentiate, a city council, a school board, and a county commissioner, I think, county government operate differently.
And to be really clear, pre-planning is standard in every district before board meetings. That's not unusual.
Okay, well, again, I need access to the agenda. I have patrons ask me things, and so if you're telling me that if I want an item on the agenda, I request it and it will happen, the rest of it, how it gets there is,
Immature.
details that I don't need to get into.
Respectfully, Director Nyquist, I would just correct that slightly in that if you, as an individual board member, want something on the agenda, but the board chair does not see a shared interest by the rest of the board to place, or a majority of the board to place that on the agenda, then you may not get your wish to have it on the agenda.
That's completely understood, but
Okay.
that would be between the two of us.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Sorry, I just want to go back. I think earlier when we were talking about carrying this meeting over, I want to make sure that everyone on the board understands that for school board meetings, we have to give 24 hours of posted notice for school board meetings. We have not done that for tomorrow night. So just something to be thinking about as we reach to the end of the meeting, how you would want to handle that. Thank you.
As this appears to us in kind of new business, would staff be objected to kind of giving this back to us with a calendar of like Augie P? Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Everybody else is. Okay. Item E3 is the board governance planning calendar.
So just a little bit of context, the board governance calendar actually came and was part of the work that Dr. Tim Mills did with the board 3 years ago. And what it attempted to do was to line up for the board those things that are required that they either approve or view annually or semi-annually, and schedule them so that the board could plan ahead of time to ensure that, for example, the January meeting wasn't always the one that went for 4 hours because we knew we had to have some approvals at the first of the year. So it was an attempt to ensure that all of the required things, both for the state and for ODE, were on there, along with requests from board members.
It's a nice planning tool for those situations like you were talking about, Director Nyquist. If you have an interest in a specific area, I know that Chair Aganaga has an interest in our food services, for example, for us to place an item on a regular basis to discuss that item.
And there's no, I guess I hadn't taken advantage of this before and requesting the chair, like, hey, could we have a meeting about adding an item to the agenda? So please take full advantage of adding that to our annual calendar, and then that gives staff plenty of time to prepare and research.
Thank you.
Is this anything we need to vote on, or is this just for informational?
This is just informational for you. I do appreciate your note for board members if they have an interest on kind of regular reporting. It would be great to communicate that with staff, and we can add that with the approval of the chair.
Yes, ma'am. All right, new item E3A. And I'll let Director Nyquist.
So I would advocate at this time that we use Robert's Rules of Orders for our operating procedures on how we conduct the public's business, how we make motions, how we deliberate, how we vote. And with a 5-member board, while I don't have a Robert's Rule of Order certificate, I've been doing this a while, and I think I know what they are. It takes a motion, it takes a second, then the chair then calls for discussion. The discussion can be whatever it will be, and then ultimately the question can be called. When the question is called, that's somebody asking for an immediate vote, and you procedurally need to vote on whether or not to call the question, but in most cases, the chair, at some point, discussion ends and we vote. And I just think that's an important way to do business. The budget of this organization for this next year is what, $200 million? So voting on matters that come before this board and are of the public interest, I think is important. In addition, I have some personal concern with consent agendas, and that if those happen, they'd be very limited. I think tonight's is a good example of a good use of a consent agenda where it involves just normal, routine personnel issues. I think that if you mix consent agendas of multiple items, it gets tricky, and you can cut off sometimes needed public conversations on those issues. I'm also concerned about executive meetings. My perspective is the fewer of those, the better. I mean, there's once in a while you got to have them, but I would hope that going forward they would be the exception and not the rule. So I don't know procedurally that we need to vote on whether or not to adopt Robert's Rules of Order, as long as it's an understanding that we all agree on and how we conduct business going forward.
Would you be object to us starting it at our next meeting? So, because some of us have followed Bob's Rules of Order, right?
Who's Bob?
It just gives us some time for
Sure.
for research and studying and.
Ultimately, the chair's in charge, so and you've got the gavel and you do whatever you want, and I won't raise any points of order tonight.
Okay. Director Wilson?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to do that. We can follow some already previously established rules and way to conduct business and all be heard. So I think it's a good thing.
Director Thompson?
You know, I think there's Robert's Rules for small boards, which we would fall under, and one distinctive difference in that is not needing a second. You could see, I think the whole thrust of Robert's rules is when you get stuck and you try to keep things moving along. I think the concept of Robert rules for small boards is to acknowledge it shouldn't be that difficult to keep things moving with a 5-member board. I just hate to be the one to have things die for lack of a second in such a small board.
Director Thompson, if they don't have a second, they probably have no chance of passing.
True, but it's a chance to be heard and to be heard, who's ever paying attention to our meetings. It's very important. It's acknowledging a little bit of slowness in time and unwillingness versus to give opportunity for voices. You're right, having a second is probably more likely to have and it probably keeps things moving along a lot quicker. But I like the idea of being able to, since I've been on here, I like the idea of being able to offer a motion. And frankly, we don't have a lot of, we go through things, I think pretty quickly. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there. Some of that, what I'm trying to say is we fit under Robert's small rules of order, is what I'm saying, as a small board.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Most of the time, I'm going to be good with someone talking about a topic if they want to talk about it, but if we're going to vote on it, it needs a second.
So I think we've come to consensus that we will operate under Robert's Rules of Order starting our next school board meeting, and that would give us some time to brush up on our skills. And if staff has any recommendations of good continuing education on Robert's Rules of Orders, sending it our way would be much appreciated. All right, that was E3A. So we're going to move on to board goals, gentlemen. These board goals were established last year. Some are similar from the year before. I have heard a little bit, we've got a lot to tackle tonight, and this is our bread and butter. There's a lot to do. We're all very young in our tenure. I would like to see if we would be willing to do a work session and kind of slow down the process of making our board goals and making sure that we can listen to our community, our constituents, and our staff before we kind of move forward with this. But that's completely up for discussion.
I would agree with that. I need some more input to be able to understand what the community at large is interested in and what's important.
Director Nyquist?
Well, it's July 12th. School starts August. So what day does school start?
It's after Labor Day.
I think that
5th or 6th or something.
I'm great with the goals that are stated. I just think there's so much that's not stated. During the course of the meeting we've had so far, there are 4 or 5 that come to my mind that I think might be no-brainers. They might not. I can introduce them and you can be good with them, or you can't. I worry about a work session again and the time and when are we going to do that and how long is that going to take or there's something in these goals that would change the focus of anything, of all the administrators and teachers that are planning right now on next year. So with that, if you'll indulge me, I'll take a shot at what I see as at least my goals as a board member
Yes, sir.
for this next year. The first issue that I hear, genuine concern from parents, from community members. They're asking questions about that again, I don't know how we get there, but we should ensure that every student gets what they need to be current in their scholastic schedule. I fear, and I hope I'm wrong, about how many third graders are starting the school year reading at a level much less than that, and what our plan is to get them caught up. And maybe that detailed plan already exists. The other part of it that scares me is I've not been able to access results of test scores. I don't know who has them, who doesn't, they're available. I guess in setting this goal, one of the questions I would ask is, what did we do in the way of testing last spring? How detailed were we, and are we establishing a baseline? And how good do we feel about how accurate that is? For example, as I understand it, at the high school level, the taking of the test was voluntary, and that might skew the quality of that sample. So I guess I would just ask the superintendent and staff about where we are and how we shape that into a goal.
Are you sharing your ideas, or are we having a discussion about, are we shaping goals together right now?
Tell me, if you can tell me
Yeah.
where we are
I think
and where
you're
we need to
wanting-
go to get to
Yeah.
that goal stated in board goals.
I think you stated it fairly well. I would just say that every student gets what they need to be current at grade level where able. I think that we certainly have students that will be above grade level, and we certainly have students, especially given the pandemic and the change in the way that students were learning for such a long period of time, who are not performing at grade level right now. We are already working with Education Excellence, which is a group whose focus is accelerating learning for all students. So I think having that board goal around grade levels makes a lot of sense. When you're talking about measuring growth, we're probably going to need to measure growth from 2 years ago and then what we do this next year. It's true, it was voluntary across the state to have students testing, and because students had already spent so much time without a full school day, we chose to have that be voluntary. We did have many students who took the test, but your opinion that those results would be skewed would be accurate. When we look at, and I'll share this with you a little bit during my superintendent's report, but when we look at the number of students who were in CDL, in distance learning, rather than in-person learning, that really accelerates as we go up the grade levels. And there's a big difference at our schools with higher levels of poverty. And those students who are in distance learning are less likely to have engaged in any of those state assessments. So that will, just by itself, skew the outcomes from this last year. What we need to be measuring are whether or not students are at benchmark, and we need to be measuring the growth curve that students are seeing from last year to this next coming year. And that's a reasonable goal for the board to have.
So when a member of the public asks, what's the kids entering third grade, what's their reading level on average? Do we have that information, and can we answer that question as a matter of transparency?
So I would say a couple of things. One, we could answer that, and I wouldn't say on average, right? What we use is what's the median growth percentile for students in the
Okay.
third grade. The other thing I would say is that, to just be really clear, taking the test is always voluntary. There's always been an opt-out, and parents have every year. We've had hundreds of kids that have done that. This year, the requirement from the state was that there was no penalty if you didn't get at least 95% participation, and you saw most of the state have much less than that, and we certainly were in that category. So the data that we have from this past year will look very different because the sample size, the N size, will be at least half of what it has been before. And so looking at what's the percentage of third graders that are at or on benchmark by the end of their third grade year is a goal that we've seen boards have, and certainly was part of some regional work even years ago when it came to third grade reading.
It's also important to note that we use multiple assessments to assess students' reading, particularly at the earlier grade levels. So we would be looking not only at the one time a year state assessment, but we would be looking at the reading assessments that we give to students 3 times a year.
So I guess it goes unstated, but where we find, this will be a unique year, and where we find we need a whole bunch of additional resources or a different or additional plan those are already in the queue, and
Correct.
I don't need to occupy my time or space trying to figure that out.
Certainly, I don't think you need to occupy your time or space figuring it out. I would love for you to continue to do it, though, with asking questions about where we are in the process. One of the steps the last board took in approving the budget was that our kindergarten and first grade class sizes are going to shrink tremendously to actually be the size that research shows can make a difference for students. That's a huge difference to get our class sizes down to 17 or 18 in those grade levels. And as we look at continued investments from the state, our priorities lie with those early grade levels to get them caught up soon.
Okay, thank you. Another goal that I have and I see necessary is an engagement plan to make sure the community gets the opportunity to be heard. And as I stated earlier, I don't necessarily think that's a board meeting. I think that's people sitting down and talking to each other, across from each other at a table, as one of the letters stated. It also, and I've touched on it in the Robert's Rules of Orders kind of comments, and that's to conduct the public's business in a way that gives our task the seriousness and the respect that it deserves. And I want to make sure that 2 weeks after we make an important decision, I don't see somebody in the street said, well, that was an important decision you made and I agree with it or I don't or whatever, but oh, by the way, you didn't actually vote on it. That can be the worst, and I don't want us to be there. So that's my Robert's Rules of Orders comment. I don't know how you put that in a goal other than to say it. I also, and maybe we're already doing this, but it's not stated in our goals, the opportunity to follow up with that class that just graduated. I'm concerned that many of them didn't get the scholastic status the other ways would have, and what we're doing about that, and what follow-up we're doing, what is our obligation, and how's our partnership with LBCC in that regard. But as a goal, I don't want to just forget those kids.
There is, Director Nyquist, there is longitudinal data that we use to track students really across the state of Oregon, but we are part of a group called the Mid-Valley Mid-Coast Partnership, which includes Oregon State University and LBCC. And what we do is we track all of our local districts and how our students continue in the educational trajectory through LBCC and through Oregon State University. So that is certainly data that you could look at, and I would suggest you might want to put that on the board governance calendar.
Okay, so again, I guess we'll have to work through the details, but it's like, I don't know I don't know the status of how they were or who needs the help or where, but I guess that will play itself out. But again, I don't want to just scholastically write them off, even though they're out of our system, because they were here and they're part of our community.
Currently, we're actually covering costs for students who recently graduated at LBCC through our summer partnership. So that's one of the ways that we ensured that they had additional supports as they enter into their next year.
Okay, another board goal I would have is to do all things in a way that brings the community together. And it's been a rough 18 months, and we just need to be diligent at all times on that. And also, it came up, and I don't know that I need to go here necessarily tonight in the way of the details of how we get there, but I do think we want to make sure that all students feel safe and secure while at school. And my last board goal will be the Senator Mayee goal always, which is that we strive for academic excellence.
I just had a quick question. I noticed that in the agenda, the board goals that were approved are not the same as the ones that were passed in BA. in the board policy.
I would need to go back and look at those. They should be listed the same, so,
Number one is concentrate the board's collective effort on policymaking and planning responsibilities. Number two is formulate board policies that best serve each student's educational interests.
yeah.
That-
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so there's a disconnect in.
Yeah.
No, those aren't an individual school board's goals for the year. In that policy, that's essentially saying that is the purview or the look that school boards have. Those weren't specific to this board or specific to the year. The board, the goals that you see in front of you, the board goals 2021, were specific goals that the last board made for themselves for that time.
So the board policy are board goals for all school boards and what their goals are in working within their systems. Each year, you as a school board will adopt your own goals specific to the needs within our system that will support those higher level goals, but they're more specific to GAPS, kids, and community.
Okay.
That's essentially just laying out for boards what their job is and what their purview is.
Mr. Thompson, Director Thompson?
Well, you know, with different wording, some of these I had written down very, very similar, with number one being student academic success from pre-K. We are now getting into the pre-K business in a big way, pre-K to 12. You know, I don't know how to work this one thing that kind of got put off to the, many things got put off the wayside because of COVID, but strategic planning, which coincides with all this, happened in late 19 and into early 20 and got sidelined by COVID. And I think picking that up would be an excellent part of the board goals. But I talked about a clear and consistent communication with our community, which I think kind of, we could reword, I mean, I could accept the wordage that Director Nyquist said, you know, similar idea. You know, just leading off, and the main thing probably should be every year is that student academic success, however, and then we need to work to define that. But I don't think I'm too far off to what Commissioner White, Director White Nyquist said.
Chair Aganaga, would you like staff to bring forward a draft of the goals as shared thus far? And then if other directors would also like to put some information in before the close of the meeting, happy to add those
You
as
don't want to
well.
read my writing over here.
Well, I am hoping that Chris Green is taking copious notes as we speak.
And Vice Chair.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I think we should, I mean, these are, like we just said, these are almost, no, they're not a year old, they're 7 months old. So adding to them's great.
Okay, so just to kind of recap lightly, ensure students have individual paths to success, track and develop outcomes of student success, community engagement and partnerships, safety and security of all staff and students. We talked about academic excellence, achieve highest academic excellence. And for myself, I always, I go back to the mental health. And I know our new HR director is going to be really big on helping us and Mr. Buttram with developing, it kind of falls into safety, but developing a safe and welcome environment for every student. So, I mean, I've talked about, and our district has just very pleased me with the addition of counselors to every elementary school. That needs to be known, how great we've done with that. We are doing contracts with outside companies to help with trauma and other things that are going on. But I would like to see us grow and offer Al-Anon classes and work with our community partners to keep improving this. A student that is in high ACEs scores or in fear is not learning. And sometimes we can't teach a student that's not ready to learn. So, mental health, Chris. Thank you. I appreciate everyone's comments. School board, we're gonna move on to E5, school board roles and committees and liaisons. So you'll see staff appearing on some of these. Some of these are doubled up with a board member and staff member. And we got it's a lot of work on this one because it's a whole new group of board members. Go ahead, ma'am, please.
Thank you, Chair Aganaga. Board members, I'd like you to consider that the chart that you have in front of you is pretty much all-inclusive of all opportunities that the former board was able to brainstorm within our community. So you will see some places that are blank. You will also see many, the wrong names clearly in those boxes now. Part of what, the first step really in writing that table will be, if you are already a part of any of those organizations, for you to let Chris Green know, and she will correct and place your name there. That just means that if, for example, I'm in Rotary, when I go to Rotary, I tell people, here's what's going on in the school district, here's what's up, and I field questions during the downtime, and occasionally I give them presentations. So we would ask the same of you with any community groups that you are a part of. If, however, we see a group that we feel is kind of a glaring hole, then we want to make sure and fill that hole so that we're communicating with that organization. So that's the tool and how it's used.
And so our homework for the next board meeting, when we bring this back, is to kind of have your dream, call it the dream sheet of where you want to be on each of those, and staff will do the same. And so we can kind of align the two bars and make sure we are covering all of our bases. It brings us to item F. Madam Superintendent, your comments.
Thank you so much, Chair Aganaga. I spoke earlier that we have some data points that I wanted to share with you. One of those, so my entire report tonight is going to be relatively short. You'll be happy about that, I'm sure. My daughter was married in my backyard on Saturday, and so in the time since your last board meeting, I have been planning for and participating in a fantastic wedding of two lovely people. I now have a son, which is so great. So what I'd like to share is information regarding instruction last spring. I alluded to the fact that we had, as kids grew older within our system, they were more likely to stay in distance learning when given the option to go back to in-person. For example, in kindergarten and first grade, we had 82% and 84% of students in person once we opened to in-person learning. When we get to the middle school levels, that drops to 72% at sixth grade, 68% at seventh grade, and only 67% at eighth grade, which is concerning because we know as we talk about mental health and as we talk about trauma, we know that students at that age often are dealing with so many competing emotions and hormones that it's really important for us to have adult eyes on students and have an adult that they know cares about them and is in contact with them regularly. When we get into high school, we did have 70% of our ninth graders who chose in person, but in 10th and 11th grade, we only had 63% for each of those grade levels in person. So that gives you a feel. Our seniors, 70% were in person. So our hope would be that we would see a difference in the fall, and what we really want to make sure that we see is that schools are at no more than 10% in that distance learning model. One thing you may not know that we learned during this time period was that for some of our students, distance learning actually was highly successful. Many of those students are high anxiety students for whom the social interactions of a regular school day were overwhelming and trauma-inducing. So that was a discovery for us that of course made sense, but we had never realigned our system to what students needed. Now that we know how to teach that way and to provide education that way, we can continue to do so for those few kids who still need that model. However, we want to have as many kids in school in person as possible. When we look at When we look at preschool, no surprise, 100% of our kids were in person, which is great. I look at the kindergartners and don't know how on earth kindergartners were doing distance learning for that long. So the other piece I mentioned that concerned me is that we have a number of our schools who are high poverty or racially and linguistically diverse, who had far more students who were learning in distance learning rather than in person. So when we are looking at those gaps, as Director Nyquist pointed out, we know that there will be need for acceleration of learning for many of our students who may not have engaged in as much time learning with teacher-directed learning. So when I look at percentages, our highest percentage of in-person was at Oak Grove Elementary School. We had 92% of our students at Oak Grove came in person. Our lowest was at South Albany High School, 64%. Memorial middle school had just over 68.5%. So when we have that many students still learning in distance learning, we have a concern. One piece that we do know that teachers have reported, and we've talked about a lot in our teacher forums that we hold. Teachers have been really trying to figure out ways for kids to turn on their cameras. And that lack of connection between teacher and student has been of real concern to all of us within the system. When that continues over a longer and longer period of time, we don't have the eyes on students that help us ensure that students' mental health is strong and helps ensure that we can actually visually see that students are understanding concepts. So it's a challenge for us as we enter into August. We need to work as a system on getting as many students enrolled in-person as possible. We have already been working on that as a cabinet level team on how we will organize people to do door knocking, how we will organize people to make phone calls, how we will do personal outreach to our families from those people that our students know. So our goal, as I said, is that none of our schools would have more than 10% of students not learning in school. And actually, I made an error. The school that had the highest percentage of in-person was Albany Options School. And it had almost 94% of students in-person learning, which I think is such a fantastic celebration. What that means is relationship matters. And they have made their connections with their students so important that students came to school in person. So I wanted to share that with you, let you know that we are actively engaging in that work right now.
And I appreciate.
I have a question if I could.
Yeah.
Have you worked out a model yet, Superintendent Goff, on how that's going to work? Will it be simultaneous transmission during class time, like say for the high school period, or will it be a separate teacher teaching?
I'll let Assistant Superintendent Harlan speak to that. It depends on the grade level.
Yeah, okay.
So one of the things that we asked was for registration to happen kind of at the end of June, both to a re-enrollment, you're a student who's already in the system, and certainly for first time. The options that we gave parents were in-person, typical what you would expect from a school year, comprehensive distance learning, and/or AOL. So just remember that Albany Online is and has always been an option for students and families who want to just have virtual or online school and do it at your own pace and convenience. It's very much self-directed, whereas comprehensive distance learning, there is a teacher and it's happens at a specific time and is teacher guided. So we've asked for families to choose one of those models so that we know who those kiddos are and in what grade. So for example, at the elementary level, when we see how many students and families have chosen comprehensive distance learning, we'll have a district model that says, for instance, I'll make this up, but we'll have one first grade teacher that does CDL and one class of kids. So it wouldn't necessarily be connected to a school in that way. Depending on how many middle schoolers that we have that choose that, we would do the same thing. So we would have one middle school, let's say English language arts teacher, that teaches comprehensive distance learning, and it wouldn't necessarily be attached to a school. That gets complicated with high school just because of the number of classes and the number of singleton classes in a master schedule that exist. And so depending on the number and who those students are, we might be able to say there is a teacher who offers these classes in CDL, but we certainly will not be able to replicate 2 master schedules from 2 comprehensive high schools in CDL. So I imagine it will look like a blend for some students, that there will be some classes that certainly are offered that way, but not every class. That would be impossible to replicate in a master schedule in that way.
Thank you.
So, this last spring, we had problems with if kids got, quarantined or something. There was a problem with a teacher necessarily backing them up. What's our thoughts on how we're gonna do that? Because my understanding was that a lot of times they just had to, it was like they were gone, they were absent, they couldn't get online and do it. We have to be ready for that come the fall, because hopefully we won't have as much of that, but we're probably gonna have some, so how are we gonna deal with that? Or do we have, are teachers gonna have cameras on, or, how are we doing it? What's the plan?
Yeah, so a couple of different things, and obviously at the high school, it's a little different than at the other levels, but specifically, if a student needed to be quarantined, let's say, and the teacher did not, I think one of the things, depending on the class, if there was a CDL class that was the same that was offered, we would have them do that so that they could still have live interaction with a teacher in a class. If it was a class that was a singleton, or it was a class that was specific that wasn't, we would have to look at something else.
So a singleton,
Oh,
just to be
sorry.
clear,
Thank you.
a singleton is a class that is only offered one time during the school day. It's not flexible, it's not repeated.
Right, so for example, let's say jazz band, right? It's only offered at a specific time, there's only one teacher. If you don't take it during that time, you don't get to take it. It's a perfect example of a class that's not well done in terms of CDL, if you're the only one who's kind of watching and literally tooting your horn at home. And so I think it will depend on the class. There will be some classes that will be easy to be able to switch to take comprehensively, and others that will not.
For the teachers our teachers have the capability to record themselves while they're teaching. So kind of the lowest backup is for teachers to record their lessons and just be teaching the class as they would, and then to post that class onto Canvas. It's not ideal because, as you were saying, you don't have that interaction with teachers.
Or with your peers.
Or with your peers. So a better option is in these situations where the class is offered more than once or by a different teacher who might be able to pick up that class
Now,
and teach
are
it.
teachers, is that part of their contract? They're required to turn on that TV and do
They're
that?
not required to teach both in
Simulcast.
person and at-home students simultaneously.
So
So
I guess my
they're not interacting with
Right,
both groups at
but the
once.
camera can be on.
But the camera can be
They
on.
just don't have to interact there. If they're getting interaction, they're getting interaction like someone was absent from the class, just like if they were sick.
Yep,
So that
correct.
student can watch it on their computer. It's just they're not going to be interacted with during that class.
Correct. And
Okay.
most of the time, it would be like back in the old days when we all went to school and you would ask for homework and you'd get the homework at the end of the day and then you'd do it that night. Similarly, our students will likely be watching those videos not in real time. They won't be watching the teacher in real time. The teacher will post at the end of the day and then the student would be watching.
And we have capabilities like Zoom will tell you how long that student watched that video for. I saw pre-recorded lesson plans on Seesaw. When a teacher was sick, it might have not been in the criteria they were working on right then, but it was able to give credit to those students that were all pre-recorded. And
Yeah.
that was amazing.
Yeah.
So we have gone, I know we've gone a long ways, very hard, because this is a huge moving mechanism.
Yeah.
But having pre-recorded classes was amazing. Being able to watch a teacher instruct rather than just read it, those things were great. I do like the holistic approach that you're talking about. That our CDL students at home, we are checking in on them more. We are doing more one-on-ones with those students. Everything from just making sure handwriting is getting done more correct. Those are big accomplishments from last year to this year. And then, Chris, I had one, sorry to go back, but I had one more board goal is, as elected officials, we should be, we should be working with our counterparts at the state legislature, the county commissioners, the city councils, because we need to collaborate with our community and tell them our wants and needs and our dislikes and likes as elected officials. Because it kind of brought me to the superintendent can request the board go out there and knock on doors and say how it is important to visit, to be in-person school for the majority.
I appreciate that
Yeah, we-
volunteerism.
Well, we all have experience knocking on doors.
That's true.
Or at the very least, to encourage that if you plan to attend public school, either virtually or in person, that you register
Yeah, that you
as soon as
register.
possible. That's helpful always.
Yeah, that you could say at every single meeting you have over the course of the next month to every single person in those meetings. Please grab 2 neighbors and tell them if you haven't registered your kid to register their child.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Never ask a question you don't know the answer to, but here I go. Are we concerned that students are registering elsewhere in an inordinate number? And if we saw that, what could we do about it?
So at the moment, no, we're not concerned. I would say we're more concerned about students who may not have engaged last year at all, who we never really saw the whites of their eyes, and making sure they get re-engaged in school. That is our primary concern. One of the things that's great about the state is we know if our students go somewhere else, so we see that. And that trend wasn't something that changed for us. But what did change was there were, especially at kindergarten last year, people chose to keep their students home and wait a year to enroll them.
So, and that database includes the private schools?
It does.
Okay.
Anytime a student transfers anywhere in the state, the school that they register has to request their records. And so every school district has a record of where that student went and who is where.
Okay, thank you.
It also includes homeschool.
So any other questions for the superintendent? And moves us on to financial report.
Actually, that's a typo. We do not have a financial report this evening because the budget was just considered. Ashley is in the throes of closing out the fiscal year, and so we wouldn't have a whole lot new to tell you.
Perfect. Board liaison reports. And so this kind of brings us back to what we just worked on. Mr. Thompson, I'm sure you probably have a few things.
No, because the policy review is taking a break during July. I believe, did we finalize with the final unit, which I'm looking at, Russ, the principals?
The AAA agreement
AAA.
was the question.
That was the
No.
final, no.
That's actually, you would look at Heather
Oh.
for that one.
Yeah. Well, we're close on that.
That's actually one of the reasons why I'm gonna ask the board later for a special session, is we have a couple of things that just were not ready to be on the public agenda.
Okay,
With the public
okay.
notice timeline, so we need to get something that's at least a couple days down the road, so we can revisit that and a couple of other things.
Okay, that is the final bargaining group. But I did, my notes, I did partake in the OSBA's summer conference. They're not holding it together like they did in Bend a couple years ago. I participated in a conference, a webinar on empowering youth voices. An interesting kind of case study from the Tiger 12th and School District. It's very fascinating. I think I'll bring up some of these points later. And I'm also going to, there's one on raising the equity question in a couple weeks. These, in my time on the board, these OSBA conferences they're legit. I mean, I have learned a lot about issues in education, issues statewide, and it makes me a better board member, and I just would encourage you to take advantage of them.
Wilson?
I was remiss last time in not thanking the voters for putting me here. So I wanted to do that. And also to my lovely wife, Carla, who's not watching because she's smarter than that. And that she's given me this much time to be away while running 2 companies and doing all the things I do. So I really want to thank everyone for putting this trust in me and allowing me to come here and do this and put the students first, which was my slogan and my true goal. And I believe all of us probably share the same goal, is to make sure we give the children the best possible education we can.
Director Nyquist.
We have more business after this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I reserve the right to talk later, but having said that, I am really interested in seeing the incoming of all one-time dollars, COVID dollars, other, what we think COVID-related, what we got, what we've spent, where we're at right now. I think it's important that we properly utilize those funds. I also have some concern about using them in a way that when they're gone, it creates a void for us. So this is a time of substantial need of resources financially, and it's also a time, I think, where in some cases it's rained money, and and so the past board addressed these issues. They developed a budget, but I think we need to keep a careful eye on, again, how that money is being spent, what the trend line is, if you will, and also when those different sources expire for being able to expend those. It's not an easy task. I'm sure somebody internally is keeping track of it, but I, for one, would like to be updated on a regular basis, those funds specifically.
The district does have a nice presentation containing the majority of that. I'm sure that they'll be happy to get over to you.
Well, but I would imagine that the dollar figures change weekly, daily, monthly, whatever it is.
Sure.
And I think we're going to see interpretations of rules that people may have different opinions of how that money can and can't be spent. So it's a very serious task, and please keep us engaged.
One of the things I would request too is that the board familiarize themselves with the public budget that was adopted. One of the things that Jim Scherzinger helped the previous board do was to put those one-time monies and grants into the budget document, which previously was not done before. It was just general fund. So both title funds and those one-time expenditures are in the budget document that say this is how much the district is expected to receive, and here's how it's been approved to spend. And that would be a really great starting place to be able to get those totals to know what that looks like.
Again, reserving the balance of my time for
Yes, sir.
whenever we're finished.
Okay.
Let's move on. I know we got more stuff to do.
Yeah, Lynn County Parole and Probation has been supported tremendously by the school district, providing lunches to summer programs, and the STEM Hub is doing great programs as well. I kind of believe that was part of our board member reports as well. If anyone doesn't have anything, we'll move on. Okay, so we will move on to, we don't have any presentations tonight, I take it?
No, we do not.
Perfect. So we have the consent agenda. Has anybody not had a chance to review it or has any exemptions?
I don't, if I can speak, I don't have, I was just curious, what is a we are hiring a couple behavior resource assistants, which sounds great, actually, I know.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, those are behavior support for schools. So a person who's.
In like a room, maybe, or a, yeah. Okay, yeah, we're hiring a bunch of those.
A staff member working from one person a day to 20 people a day.
Trying to consolidate so that it isn't one person who's point two who does it on this day, a different person who's point two that does it at this school, yeah.
If I don't hear any rebuttal, the consent agenda passes. Moving us into old business. Don't see any old business. Into reports
There are no reports.
and bond business / reports, M1.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. I'm going to stall just a little bit while David McKay moves up here into the speaking chair. We have a few items for the board's consideration tonight. The first one up is consideration of, or the awarding of the contracts to purchase modular buildings for Waverly and for North Albany Elementary School. For the benefit of the new school board, it takes a minute to wrap your head around this, but a lot of these items end up coming back to the board multiple times. So the idea of putting modulars in at these schools came up to the previous board, and the budget for the overall project came to the board, and they approved that. This is now the actual purchase of the modulars in order to implement that previous board decision. So anything that comes in at under $150,000, I can approve on behalf of the board and bring it back later for you. Anything bigger than that comes to the board ahead of time for a decision to make sure that the board is comfortable with how we're moving forward. So this is an example of that, where we are asking the board to approve the purchase of these modulars to implement the previous plan.
Did these end up come in at cost that we thought they would, or? I know a lot of building stuff has changed.
These,
While you're looking for that, gentlemen, this is Mr. David McKay. He is the guy that runs HMK Company. They do all of our construction oversight for us in the district, and they've been with us since the South Albany fire.
Or
2002, actually. I started.
Maybe the first one?
project I
Yeah.
started.
A long time.
Long time. Yes. But Building 9 was, yes, a large project. Can I answer that question?
go ahead.
We have seen a slight inflation, but we believe our budget can contain that.
I'm so sorry, Mr. McKay. We have to mic you for the people at home.
There we go.
Thank you.
From when we originally put the budgets together, we've seen some inflation, slight inflation on the cost of the buildings. We believe we have that covered, though, with contingency.
And basically, once we say yes to it, that's the cost. I mean, they don't raise it from there other than contingencies.
We will issue the purchase order tomorrow to lock those prices in.
That is not the entirety of the cost for the project, that's for the purchase of the building.
So can you tell me in summary again, how many of these are we purchasing and what is our cost per item?
So we are purchasing two sets of modulars. We're putting one set in at Waverly and one set in at North Albany Elementary School.
Does two sets mean four then? There's,
Just two classrooms.
Let me.
I'm sorry. Okay,
Two
right.
schools. And the reason that we chose those two schools was we're trying to forecast where we think we're going to have classroom deficiencies in the fall, particularly tied in with what Superintendent Goff mentioned earlier with the red shirting of the kindergartners and the desire to
Red shirt,
reduce,
nice.
Great. Great expression.
for lack of a better term,
Thank you.
the red shirting of the kindergartners and the desire to reduce class sizes, trying to go back and put these into place. So it is a 3-classroom modular that we're putting in at Waverly, and correct me if I misstate anything, David, and a 2-classroom modular that we are putting in at North Albany Elementary School. The key difference at the two schools, at Waverly, we're doing what's called a pit set modular, which is, you build a foundation for it, you put it in there, and you treat it essentially like a permanent building once you get it installed. And it becomes a part of the school. At North Albany Elementary, we're doing what you'd consider a more traditional modular approach with the idea that it will help us to survive this kindergarten piece and a 5th grade bubble, but it won't necessarily live there forever. It would then become available to potentially be moved within the district. Once you pit set something, we really are reluctant to try to move them because you lose a lot of the value of it. So that's us trying to guess the future and get us set up for that success. And these are purchased using ESSER funds. So this aligns, Director Nyquist, with your question about one of the ways we are using one-time money.
so was there some consideration of putting something similar at South Shore? How does South Shore project in the way of classroom size, and are they going to be okay without additional modulars?
Right now, the primary problem at South Shore is they have modulars, they have the space that they need, but the modulars that they have are in very poor condition. And so we are, it's a future project that we're looking to bring to the board here shortly, but we are looking at replacements for the modulars at South Shore.
So are they in such poor conditions that they're not being used?
They're not in that poor of condition, no.
they're being used.
They're being used.
Might we be able to use the same funding stream?
The ESSER money?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that is part of the plan.
Yeah.
What-
I would just say Executive Director Buttram has done a great job in working with the state to ensure that we have the flexibility that we need to meet that need, the needs he's presenting tonight, and then the needs that you're talking about at South Shore as well.
Can you, without holding you to it, can you project a timeline for South Shore?
Our goal is to still have the construction completed by the 22 school year, the start of it. So a fairly quick turnaround on it. and coming back to the board. I'm going to ask for a little fuzziness and say soon on bringing the package formally to the board.
Okay,
But the package is not delaying us yet.
okay.
Russ, how big are the classrooms? How many square feet?
I would have to look that up on, go ahead.
They're roughly 900 square feet,
'Cause it's
which
about-
is what
it's-
we consider a standard.
Yeah, I'm just
classroom.
figuring out cost per square foot. It's $170,572 per classroom, just to buy them. Because you got 5 classrooms and you've got the dollar amount here. And so you look at, yeah, that's not bad, $190 a square foot.
Right, which is significantly less than stick framing today.
Yeah, our earlier number I had seen, I thought it came out to 600. That's why I was concerned. But this number doesn't bother me. I do some construction as well, so.
Right.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you.
I guess the only other comment I would have is, I don't think, is it 4 years ago the bond passed, that it was conveyed to the voters, or they envisioned that in 4 years we would have to be buying modulars to put up. I think the projection at the time was this covers our needs for the next 10 years. So when we engage the public, I think we need to talk about that a little bit. I think part of the response is we tried to go from 30 to 20, and maybe that wasn't envisioned 4 years ago, and you're using the federal funds to do it. But when I saw it on the agenda and I saw it in the newspaper, I thought, so,
Director Nyquist, I think the other key thing in there, and I'll ask Assistant Superintendent Harlan to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's also a function of the fact that we're specifically trying to reduce kindergarten class sizes, which means you just need more classrooms, just mathematically, in order to bring the class sizes down. And that, I don't believe, was part of the planning in the bond specifically. I wasn't here for that part.
Kindergarten and first grade.
That's
I'm
correct.
sorry, yes.
Dylan?
No, I don't have any.
Will this achieve the goal? Will we be able to get the classroom size down to, say, 17?
Yeah, we believe so, unless we have unforeseen enrollment, right? That space becomes the limitation for it. I honestly think, oddly, to what Director Nyquist is talking about with the amazing support of the bond, I think at this point in time, the limitation would become the physical plant space for us rather than the staffing, which we would never have foreseen 5 years ago when folks were working on the bond. It just wasn't on anybody's radar that Oregon would support our schools to the level that they are right now. Excluding the one-time ESSER funds, just really talking about raising the state school fund in a way that supports us lowering class sizes in an ongoing way.
Okay, good.
We know we're in discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the awarding the contract for modular classroom construction to Modern Building Systems in the amount of $852,860 as presented by staff.
I would second the motion.
The motion has been moved and seconded. The motion is to move to approve awarding the contract for modular classroom construction to Modern Building Systems in the amount of $852,860 as presented by staff. Director Thompson?
Aye.
Director Wilson?
Aye.
Director Nyquist?
Aye.
Vice Chair?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. Motion passes.
Thank you. Next up, we have the item M2, the awarding of contract amendments 26, 27, 28, and 29 to DLR Services at West Albany. This is part of our ongoing effort to close out all of the work that's occurring over at West Albany, and we've had to ask DLR to engage in additional projects to make sure that that comes to fruition the way that we're hoping for, and these contract amendments reflect that additional work performed by DLR.
Any discussion? I'll entertain motions.
I would move approval as requested.
Do we want to
There are 4 different
approve them
motions.
individually? Yeah. I don't know if you can see them in your board packet.
This is the piece that doesn't print in the packet, but it's available, it's information provided for the board is the recommended motion language. The first one would be to recommend to approve change order 26 for DLR in the amount of $6,060.
Yeah,
It's the
I move
recommended
approval of
language.
that one.
Is there a second?
I second.
The motion has been approved and seconded. Make a motion to approve change order 26 for DLR in the amount of $6,060. $60 as presented by staff. Director Thompson,
Aye.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Nyquist,
Aye.
Aye.
and I also vote aye. The second one,
I move to approve change order 27 for DLR in the amount of $17,675 as presented by staff.
any second on it?
I'll second.
Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. The motion is to approve the change order number 28 for DLR in the amount of $18,320, I skipped it. didn't I?
27.
Motion was for
27, in the amount of $17,675 as presented by staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to change order number 28.
Let me do them all. I make a motion to approve change order 28 for DLR in the amount of $18,320 as presented by staff.
Any second?
I'll second it.
Motion has been moved and seconded to make a motion to approve change order number 28 to DLR in the amount of $18,320 as presented by staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. And number 4.
There's a typo in this one, Mr. Chair. It should say 29.
Yeah.
Okay.
I move to approve change order 29 for DLR in the amount of $10,150 as presented by staff.
I'll second.
Motion has been moved and seconded to make a motion to approve change order number 29 for DLR in the amount of $10,150 as presented by staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Next up, Mr. Chair, we have item M3. This is change orders 26 and 27 for Girding Builders. Similar to the one previously, it's related to tying up everything at West Albany. And also this one includes the use of unallocated bond funds. And again, all of this work has been validated by Girding Builders and our Facilities Department as being fully performed.
So this time I'll hear discussion or if anyone would like to make a motion.
I would move we approve.
And a second.
I'll second.
Motion has been approved and has been made and seconded for change order number 26 for Girding Builders in the amount of $18,803.30 as presented by staff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And anyone want to make a motion for number 27?
I move to approve change order 27 for Girding Builders in the amount of $295,917.96 as presented by staff.
I second it.
Motion has been made and seconded to make a motion to approve change order number 27 to Girding Builders in the amount of $295,917.96 as presented by staff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair, next up, we have the West Albany post-construction project list. These are the projects that as the bond is wrapping up, that fall outside the scope of the bond that still, in the assessment of staff, need to be completed right now, rather than deferred until we have a better visibility on the overall bond. So we've brought forward a recommendation, because we have brought forward a recommendation for the board to consider that has identified all of the items that are on that list, as well as the ones that we are currently recommending for completion and the ones that we would defer. So when you're looking at the list in your board package, the items that are listed in green are what we are saying you should do now, and the items that are not highlighted in green are the items that we would recommend deferring until a later date.
That's in the attachment?
That is in the attachment.
Okay. You take it all at once, or do we have to go?
So I've left two options in there because I wasn't sure where the board would want to go with it. The way that I have drafted it, sort of the easy path, would be to simply make a motion to approve the $407,347, as is spelled out in board book. The other option I left there was if the board wanted to go through and do line item moves in one direction or the other, they could approve it as presented by staff with add this, delete that, add this, delete that. And we would have to do some public math to figure out the totals.
My only concern, and we talked about it a little bit, and I'm not against it, I just more than anything want to understand it, was the unisex bathrooms. So, I mean, my concern, I mean, that's fine, you know, and I think that's the way we're moving, and that's fine. So we'd have, but there's just 4 toilets for this, right? And there'll be a men's and a female's, but for 4 toilets that already exist, us paying almost 80 grand seems like an awful lot of money.
So the issue here when we were looking at this one, and this one was one that I honestly scratched my head a little bit, and I did check in with Principal Orsborn this afternoon on it, and she supports this method going
Yep.
forward. The rationale is the gender-neutral bathrooms were not included in the original design because they were not required by code. But when the building was constructed, and you actually start to walk through it and you realize how it lays out, it, for lack of a better term, doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like they're in a location that's appropriate. So we started heading down this path to consider them. The intuitive solution would be to simply drop dividers in there like you would have in a normal bathroom. That doesn't solve the problem because you have the areas underneath and above. Then you would say, okay, let's just do floor-to-ceiling dividers that you would drop in there, which would also be fairly cost-effective. The problem there is the simplicity of that solution doesn't actually line up with the Americans with Disabilities Act because the area that is underneath the stall doors that you would see in a traditional bathroom is considered toe movement space when you're in a wheelchair. And so you have that additional space to move in. So you have to get to a point where you say, we're gonna drop complete walls in there because you don't, you need to have privacy if you're gonna have a gender-neutral bathroom. That combined with ADA means you've got to make that first stall wider, which means you've got to relocate the second stall, which becomes expensive, and you also have to address the HVAC issues in there. I am cautious, David's gonna smack me in the back of the head when I say this, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we have overestimated this cost a little bit. We didn't want to come back later and say, surprise, it costs more. So we wanted to put the full picture on there. The other challenge, and the reason that I said it needed to be done now rather than deferring, is I believe if you open the door to that bathroom as a gendered bathroom, it is really tough to unring that bell. To get people to see it as a gender-neutral bathroom, once it's already been a boys' bathroom or a girls' bathroom, it will not be perceived correctly.
We're just making it a bathroom for
Yeah.
anyone.
Yes,
It's just a
anybody.
bathroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's my understanding, it's a bathroom that'll have a sink area, then it'll have 2 stalls that are rooms of their own.
Independently locking doors in 2 stalls.
Which is not uncommon for what we have at like Oak Grove, where the boys and girls share a sink, but separate bathroom areas.
Correct.
Is there any more questions or discussion on this item?
So where are we procedurally? Is this an action item and is there a motion on the floor?
There it is.
There's not a current motion, but it's an action item requested by staff for a motion to approve $407,347 in currently unallocated bond funds to complete the items listed as presented by staff.
I move to do just that.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Hang in there a second. The item has been moved and seconded to approve $407,347 in currently unallocated bond funds to complete the listed items in green in the enclosed as presented by staff with modifications or without modifications. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, David.
I think we're back to the other side of the table.
All right, Chair Aganaga, I'm so sorry I'm unable to access Board Book for some reason from my computer, so I keep sharing with Assistant Superintendent Harlan. But what we're discussing next is the Ready Schools Safe Learners Guidance, which has undergone a very significant shift since its last iteration. We will still see one more update in this document, July 22nd, but we're almost there. So if board members had a chance to review, I'll just point out a few important factors. One is that Ready Schools, Safe Learners, the decisions that are made by the board or the superintendent, those can become effective immediately for summer school classes in addition to 21, 22. The second is that the state is now going to local decision-making, and part of that means that the superintendent and the school board get to decide locally rather than at the state level, the level of protections. Almost everything in Ready Schools, Safe Learners now is advisory and not required. We'll go over the things that are required, but almost everything is advisory. So one of the points of action that the staff is going to ask for the board to take tonight is to decide whether you want those decision points around health and safety protocols to lie in the hands of the board or lie in the hands of the superintendent. If you follow along with me, we are going to jump around to a few different pages. The first is just to take a look at the bottom of page 3. Actually, it's the bottom of page 4, where we can see that health and safety recommendations are in place so that we can return to full-time in-person instruction for all students. To honor and recognize the uniqueness of the communities across Oregon, so each community is going to look a little different in how they do this, and to support schools in health and safety planning for community-specific needs and strengths. There are also some pieces that this document asks us to note. Our communities will be living with this virus until there is widespread immunity. COVID-19 continues to change with new variants, as we've seen with the Delta variant. Our knowledge of mitigation efforts grows over time, and for these reasons, the guidance for responding to COVID-19 also changes. Right now, the best tools we have to protect individuals are vaccination for those who are eligible, and that right now we have vaccines available for people as young as 12 years old. Physical distancing, face coverings, ventilation and airflow, where as the former board or the board members from last year know, we spent a lot of our investment around ventilation and airflow, hand hygiene, and staying home ill if you're ill or exposed to someone with COVID, and that opportunity for transmission decreases with every mitigation step that we take. As we go forward, the state is still expecting that we are paying attention to equity. I think one of the letters that you received in public comment actually spoke to all of those pieces: ensuring safety and wellness, center health and well-being of everyone, cultivate connection and relationship, prioritize, prioritize equity, innovate. So really using what we have learned through COVID in how we continue to support kids who might be, for example, having to learn from home due to a quarantine. We also, if we jump down to page 7, we see one important requirement that is a federal law. And so right now, the CDC is still requiring mask wearing on public transportation. So this is not a choice that the board or the superintendent can make at this time. Our school buses everybody must still be masked going to and from school or anywhere on a school bus. There are, however, some rules to pay attention to. One is that we need to submit an operational plan. Those of us familiar know that we have already submitted blueprints to ODE, so we are well versed in creating that operational plan. We have to have plans in place around communicable disease management. We have invested through the additional dollars in the state school fund and other resources that are ongoing in expanding our nursing services so that we are able to also add health coordinator, thank you, for the school district, who is also an experienced school nurse, has been the lead nurse for us. School administrators are still going to be required to exclude staff or students from school, so that's not something, if they suspect they've been exposed to COVID, that's not an optional. School administrators should also plan for and maintain healthcare in space, so we've had isolation rooms required. There will be something of that nature still required as we move forward. Another piece to pay attention to is instructional time requirements. So last year, the state waived some of the requirements around instructional time and increased allowed us to count more hours of conferencing or other time spent with parents or students in office hours. We now have requirements around instructional time that go back to pre-COVID. And if you want to jump in on anything, jump away. We also know that, and this is not an issue for us, there's a requirement if we started using new instructional materials that we hadn't gotten approved through the state, we need to go through the formalized adoption process, which is required, and we follow that regardless when we're using materials. State assessments, so those, the state assessment requirements will go back into play, so we will be doing those state assessments at each grade level. There are some changes in how we track attendance and enrollment that is more typical to what we did pre-COVID, but still has some aspects of what we learned during COVID for students who are in distance learning. Planning for mental health supports is a part of RSSL, which I know that Chair Aganaga has really carried the banner for within the school district on the board. And what I love about this is it really, parses out all the components needed to have a well-rounded social, emotional, mental health support, not only for students, but also for our staff. And when we receive feedback from our staff most recently, that is one of the areas where staff are really frustrated. They need more mental health supports. It's very difficult in our county. We don't have very many mental health supports. All of our mental health providers, including our county mental health, is overtaxed right now. And where we have investments to hire more staff, oftentimes those well-trained staff aren't anywhere to be found. So it's certainly an area of focus. We need to continue our school safety and prevention planning. So I just wanted to make sure that the board is aware that these updates are taking place. Staff will be working on the operational framework, the operational plan, and the communicable disease plan. What staff need to know from this board is whether the board would like to have the purview over the decision-making for those safety protocols, or whether you would like for the superintendent to make those decisions.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. So we'll hear discussion on the question at hand.
So I have an understanding that I've not seen in the latest from the Department of Ed, so it might not be current, but it's my understanding that the state has said, here are the rules, here are the state rules, and local authorities can go beyond those to create additional sets of rules. And their current rule, and I'll just pick masks as an example, is it's not required other than senior facilities, buses, those things. And so I guess I'm perplexed that an affirmative decision is required by anybody, either by staff or by the governing body, to just comply with the state law. If the goal and the mission is to do above and beyond that and be stricter, if you will, that's a decision that I think we're deciding that we would make or you would make.
So I appreciate that question. So as a point of clarification, there are certain public agencies that deal with a large part of our population who are unvaccinated. One of the primary places that occurs in schools. So because no children under 12 are eligible for a vaccine yet, that means that none of the students under 12 are vaccinated. We can also look at the vaccination rates within Linn County, and you can see how low those are, especially as compared to other counties within the state. Certainly, we're not approaching the 65% or 70% that we're hoping to get to. We're certainly not seeing that for the younger kids as well. So when you're thinking about risk levels and thinking about staff, who of course have the choice of whether or not they want to be vaccinated, And we do not require them to show us that they're vaccinated, but we are still responsible for the health of everybody who is commingling on a daily basis. Those protective factors become more important than, say, someone at a grocery store who may have a very brief interaction with someone at a checkout line versus being in a classroom with a student for a long period of time or hovering over their shoulder. So we are concerned about the public rate of transmission and how do we control that. The state actually does ask local boards or superintendents to make an affirmative decision. They have created advisories for you within the RSSL. You should have a copy of that. It was provided to you with your packet. And you can look at all of those places where the state is advising different health and safety protocols.
Any further discussion?
Well, there should be substantial discussion on this important issue.
I know.
So, again, I will have to go back and follow up on what you presented. It was, and I suppose in the end, it doesn't really matter that the choice is, and it's the most immediate issue before us as to whether or not the district should continue in the requirement of wearing masks.
Not only mask, distancing, 3 feet of space
Okay.
for children, 6 feet of space for adults, things such as that.
Okay. And so I think it's also true that action would go above and beyond what the state is requiring right now.
Depends.
The
So
state is asking for districts to make an affirmative choice. At this point in time, I guess I should go back. At this point in time, our district is, as we can all see, requiring masks. So there's an affirmative action that must be taken by you as a board, or if you decide by me as superintendent, for us all to remove our masks, as an example.
So as I look at these criterias and everything from ODE, while Lynn County has a low vaccination rate, have we looked at vaccination rate? Is it possible to look at vaccination rate for like 97321 and 97322? Is that possible? Because I think those numbers would be dramatically different, and that would be part of our education as a board to make that decision of, while Lynn County's numbers may not be that great, Albany's numbers are pretty good.
So I just, if I can speed this along, as I understand it, and maybe I don't have the decision point before us, the choice we have is whether or not to retain that decision-making authority, or whether or not to delegate that to the superintendent. And my guess is, if we choose to retain that authority, people will not be required to wear masks. And if we delegate that to the superintendent, they will be.
I think that's an assumption. I can't make a decision without you giving me authority. So that assumption is based upon the fact that it sounds as if the assumption is that I would make a blanket statement around where masks could be worn. I certainly would want to be in conversation with our unions regarding their concerns for health and safety in the work environment. It wouldn't be a decision that I would make unilaterally this evening.
So you're telling me today that state law requires us in this room right now to be wearing masks?
I'm telling you that right now, this district has already made the decision for everyone to be masked. So this district needs to take affirmative action to change that if this district does not want that to be happening. The state advises that they are shifting now from state level authority to now local control. So this is the opportunity for this new board to take advantage of that local control.
Do we make a motion at this point?
Yeah, on the action requested by staff, option 1 or option 2.
I'd like to make a motion to retain authority to the board to make RSSL decisions for students and staff.
Is there a second?
I second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion passes unanimously.
And so I guess my follow-up question is that,
You now,
as you understand things, we would
We
need
can
to
now make
make
a
a
motion.
follow-up motion and vote
correct.
to, specific to mask wearing.
Specific to mask wearing, yes. You would,
Distancing and the protocols allowed by the state, I would assume. We might be able to word this a little bit clearer, but I can't wait to get the mask off, boys.
The other thing I would
Ladies
say
and
is, the staff would request that you give consideration to, is there a difference between adults who are working in a building where there aren't students in the summer, adults who are working with students, adults who are working with students who are or are not vaccinated in terms of their age, if they're younger or older. So, and just to remember that when you say no masks anywhere, that won't be true because there will still be a federal requirement that children wear masks on school buses in transit.
Wasn't my intent to say anywhere, if I said anywhere.
Yeah, I didn't intend to say that either. If I did, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be, flip it, I guess. So,
I move that the Greater Albany Public School District no longer require the wearing of masks consistent with state law.
I second that.
Motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No, because I'm sorry, I had a question. I should have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
Well, consistent with state law, doesn't state law, as we just discussed, state law brings it back to us as a local.
Absent, as I understand it, absent a requirement at the local level
Okay,
that you require masks, masks are not required.
okay.
But they're requiring it on the bus, and we're,
I just, can I just speak, just in general, I generally think, as a parent of a 10-year-old who will not be vaccinated, I don't know when they'll get to the under 12 crowd. I think we have to make an exception for the under 12 crowd. And I don't know how that affects summer programs that are happening right now. I'm looking ahead, I hope, via lower, if in a few months the transmission rates are lower in the county, maybe reevaluate it, but they are completely at risk to, so.
Yeah, I would say certainly parents can make that choice, and there should be no mask shaming at all. I mean, if people choose and have comorbidities or other issues, they should be allowed to do that at their discretion.
Yeah, we're talking about children. And I want to ask staff how difficult it is allowing, I'm sure it'd be difficult for teachers, a mixed situation where some are masked and some aren't. How much of a challenge would that be?
Yes, I think that would be a challenge. I think, one of the concerns that we always have is if some kids need to wear their masks because their parents want them to, or they themselves want to, is there ostracism that will occur because they choose to do so or are required to do so? That is a requirement of the adults within the system to make sure that students are taken care of and treating each other with respect and dignity. I think it would be best for adults within that situation to be wearing a mask. If any of their students need to wear a mask, then the adult in the classroom should wear the mask out of respect for that student to help them feel included. That, in this case, would be professional judgment. I think that we will have quickly complaints from the union if the board goes forward and declares mask-free for everyone at all times because of the fact that we have all of these young people pre-K to 12 years old who will not be vaccinated. I think that is the challenge before the board, is how do you address that concern for families when we really want 90% of our kids to be back in person. and we have families who are in that distance learning group who aren't coming because they're concerned about the spread of COVID, I think that action could have negative impacts that the board may not be predicting. Certainly, it would also have some interest from folks who feel like that gives their students greater freedoms. But I do know the communicable disease specialist for Samaritan Health spoke to our Rotary about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, and gave a fantastic presentation on the impact of COVID on both adults, but then on children and what they're seeing with young people. So the concern isn't about death for young people. The concern is the long-term impacts on their health, particularly with their heart, with their circulation system, and their breathing. And so those are factors that we, of course, need to keep in mind and just be cognizant of as you make your decision.
So, I hate to be a Robert's Rules
We voted on
stickler here, but I think we voted and it was
did
4 to, maybe it would have been 1, I don't know, but I think the motion passed. So I do think it's something we need to monitor, and we need data and we need information. I also think that there's a standard of expectation, for lack of a better term, when they're not wearing them at the Y and they're not wearing them at the Boys and Girls Club and they're not wearing them anywhere else. It becomes a hard battle in two ways. One is that many are not happy wearing them, and it's a challenge to do that. And the other problem in that is with them not wearing them anywhere else, how much are you really accomplishing?
It's tough because kids aren't required to go to the YMCA or the grocery store, but they're required to spend a lot of their time in school. I'm sorry that the board didn't take the opportunity to ask or solicit input specifically from elementary staff, who will be at greater risk because they're around large amounts of unvaccinated students, which is different than secondary staff. And I know that a concern has come and been frequent from elementary staff. So I would anticipate that that will be a voice that you'll likely hear.
And we could do this all night, but none of us are nurses or doctors, and, the rate of children getting it is much lower. We have given the unions 6 weeks to get vaccinated before we return to school, our employees. So I feel that we've made good measures forward. And like Director Nyquist said, this is something we are going to watch very strictly, and in case of emergency, we can go into a meeting and make adjustments. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, and I appreciate that we'll be watching it closely. I think one of those things that our student school board member would remind us of is that she lives in a multi-generational home, and one of the reasons she wasn't going to go to school in person was that she wasn't eligible to be vaccinated. So until she was able to be, she didn't go to school. There is a disproportionate impact on our communities of color on the impact of COVID, and I think that as we're talking about your commitment to equity and to all students, that is one thing we certainly will monitor for you and bring back that data.
Thank you, ma'am.
Could I offer one unsolicited data point to consider? You don't have to eat this apple all at once. You could choose to remove masks for any environment that is adults only and allow time to have additional information on the rest of it. That would affect the summer programs that are ongoing right now, but wouldn't affect anything else. And it would give you a chance to move a little bit more incrementally.
We are still giving free PPE to staff as well right now. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to N2.
Dr. Bucky?
So,
Yes, sir.
clarification,
We voted.
we voted and we can now dispense with masks, is that correct? Thank you so much.
N2, proposed annual organization.
So the vote we just did covered board too?
As I believe so, unless staff or other directors have
Right.
see otherwise. Okay. So N2, who's on?
That's Director Buttram.
Oh, sorry, that was me. N2, got a little bit distracted there. These are two standard annual requirements that we complete two organizational resolutions. They are both provided for you. They are very similar to the resolutions that we've used in the past. But in each case, the board is required to affirmatively pass our organizational resolution and the IDEA resolution that's listed.
And this just comes to us as new business, and we'll look at it again at our next meeting.
We've requested that the board take action. If it is delayed, that is not necessarily a deal breaker. But if it is considered non-controversial and we can move forward on it, we would prefer to move forward on it.
There's a lot on this, and some of us are new to board book. If it's not crucial
Is
with
this
the
the
board.
naming of the?
Yeah.
I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. So there's actually two different motions. The first one is to make a motion to approve annual organization resolution 21/22-1 as presented by staff. That's the one. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And the second motion is to approve an annual Individual Disabilities Education Act Resolution 21/22-2.
I move approval.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Future agenda items.
Mr. Chair, I would like to recommend that the board consider a special board session sometime before the end of next week in order to allow staff to bring forward a couple of items that came together at the last minute. The first one being the new transportation facility. Similar to the awarding of the modular contract, we've approved the transportation facility. Now we have the contract information necessary to award the approval of the lifts, but we didn't have it in time to put it into this meeting. Delaying that will cause construction problems for that. We also have something a little less contentious with a potential donation for Calapooya, and we have the ongoing work with AAA. So my recommendation, if it's available, would be to establish a special board meeting to address those issues. I imagine the meeting would be fairly brief. Sometime, I think for the purposes of AAA, middle of next week or later would be better.
Could the stuff be ready as soon as Wednesday?
This Wednesday?
Yeah.
The pieces I have can be. I don't know about AAA. That's the,
I would have to speak with Ken Gilbert, who's representing AAA, and I just can't guarantee that he'd be able to represent.
I move we schedule a special meeting on Wednesday, the 14th, 7 PM.
7 PM?
Yep.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays?
No, no.
Any other future agenda items?
Well,
Thanks.
I don't know if this should have been covered in new business or not, but are we now open for in-person?
That was part of your
Attendance.
decision-making, yeah, that was part of the decision-making that you did not vote on yet. You talked about,
Matt, correct.
yeah.
Is it possible to go back to new business to allow people to come in?
You could do it on Wednesday, either way.
Why don't we add that on Wednesday? And then we'll move forward.
So no public,
So you don't want the
Presence on
public here on the
Wednesday.
special hearing, or a special meeting?
Let's make that decision Wednesday.
No, I move to allow the public
Thank you.
to come on Wednesday.
I second, thank you. Yes, that's what I was trying to get at. I was doing it poorly.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Any other future agenda items? Other business? All right, we are adjourned at 9:22. Thank you all.